I want to encourage all of you to buy this book. She's not paying me for saying that to you, but it really is quite an extraordinary journey. It is a memoir of Liberia's descent into madness and of your journey in it, through it, and out of it. But for right now, let us journey together across the continent of North America, across the Atlantic, to the continent of Africa, and in particular to Liberia. America and Liberia have a particular relationship, a particular history together. Would you just speak to that briefly, Leymah?
Okay. Thank you all for coming. Miss Carol made us. I call her my therapist because this book was a therapy. Um, Liberia is that country that free slaves from here in the U.S. went to in 1822. And everything about Liberia is like America. So you have our flag, like the US flag, but with one star. Our constitution model, like the US Constitution. We have three branches of government, like here. We call the house that our parliamentarians sit in capital. We we do, like I said, have the Supreme Court with the Chief Justice, just like here. Um, Everything. Some of the streets are named after famous people from here and famous cities. We have a Virginia and a Maryland and different places, and Monrovia is after President James Monroe. So we do have a rich history, and one Liberian woman put it in a very nice context. Liberia, America's stepchild. Yeah.
I'm always interested when there is the kind of strife that has been so long lasting, was so long lasting in Liberia, of the conditions that may have made that possible. Would you speak to that, please?
Well, when the slaves came to Liberia, the indigenous people, like any other place where you have indigenous people, where, and it's ironical that I'm speaking about it here in California with your own history, were welcoming of the free slaves. They gave them their land, they made them comfortable, and something that is typical of abused people, they don't know how to show gratitude. The only life they knew is the life of abuse. So what had been meted to them on the plantation was what they meted against the indigenous people when they got very powerful. So we had segregated schools. We had everything that people had. So for 100 plus years, indigenous people were the virtual slaves of the quote unquote descents of the free slaves. Um, if I may give a quick example, if you had a last name like my last name, many of the people, if you were fair color like me and aspiring to go to university, some of the free slave descent who didn't have children would tell you, take my last name because that last name of yours is not a representation of, people who should come to the university. So those were, they founded a technical school for children of indigenous people because they were preparing them for the life of service to children of the free slaves.
Throughout the book, your wonderful, wonderful book, you spoke time and again about fear. And I want to read a very short one-line a sentence that is just so wonderful. And I quote, "When you move so quickly from innocence to a world of fear, pain, and loss, it's as if the flesh of your heart and mind gets cut away, piece by piece, like slices taken off a ham. Finally, there is nothing left but bone." Leymah, I'd like you to speak to that through the lens about this issue of fear, through the lens of a woman and a mother in Liberia?
Well, first I will step back and speak to that through the lens of a child. Because I was a child when the war started, a 17-year-old teenager who had been protected by her community and her family. And you wake up one morning and it's all gone. And you're afraid. The sound of the gun, the absence of your parents, the absence of your siblings, the many relatives coming and telling stories of horrors. The fear is never ending. And I think it's at that point that that peace starts to go away. And then as it progresses, you're praying that this madness will end. I'll go to bed tomorrow and it will be okay. And you wake up the next morning and it's worse than the day before. A piece has been taken off. And by the time you look at yourself from 17, like myself, I'm 31. And beyond the pains and the scars of the war and the fears of the war, you have the whole issue of violence and all of the different things that you've seen. So it's just one issue after the other. But that fear is something that pushes you back into a space that is difficult to describe. You are afraid. So it takes hope. It takes courage. It takes a lot away from you day by day. And most of the time, people who rain terror on people, that's what they want. Gradually, they are stripping you of your strength. They are stripping you of your willpower. They are stripping you of everything that would ever bring you to the place where you are able to fight back.
And as a mother, I mean, there were times when your children were hungry, they were exhausted. It's unimaginable what that must have been like for you.
You know, sometimes it's difficult to really put it into context. But by the time I started having children, the fear of the guns had gone away. The fear of what could happen to me was gradually going away. It was the fear for their own lives, for the lives of those children. How do they survive in the midst of all of these? And then you get to a place where you realize that I don't have the power to even protect these children because it's not in my power. And then you get numb and you just sit there and you can't function and you can't do anything. If you have faith, you pray. But in my case, I lost faith. So it was difficult to even pray.
And then we have Charles Taylor, who comes on the scene around 1989, and he has his own private army. And one of the most egregious things that he does, in my estimation, is that he has the small boys' army, ages 9 to around 15, who are given guns, they're hopped up on alcohol and drugs, and they commit horrific atrocities. How, because in a way they were a victim also, how have you had to work with yourself to find peace and forgiveness and reconciliation with these kids who have perpetrated such horrific crimes against women and children in particular?
You never really want to think about the last thing you want to think about when you see child soldiers is to start thinking about reconciliation and peace and how do we make life better for one another. I remember when I started working with those group of young boys in 1998, I would stand there, even as they're raining insults on me, I'm cursing the day they were born and saying, no wonder you have one leg, in my mind. And it's just anger and anger for me. But I was at a place where we have a parable. It says I was at a place, it was like the porcupine intestine. It's too bitter to swallow and too greasy to throw away. I needed to go to school. This was the job for me. And that was the requirement for me to go back to school. So it was bitter to swallow. But then the school was the greasy part that I could not throw away. So I would stay with them, listen to them. But you know, God has his way. As I engage with these children, even through all that facade of men or boys turn to men and vicious killers.